The murder of Ruggero Pascoli on August 10, 1867 is a famous cold case that took place in Italy and was officially dismissed by 19th century magistrates as a crime committed by unknown perpetrators. However, historical consensus and modern archival investigation point toward a calculated conspiracy rooted in professional rivalry, political corruption, and the complicity of powerful elites. The crime was not a random act of violence, but a contract killing orchestrated to remove the administrator of the wealthy Torlonia estate and install a more compliant successor. Unable to secure legal justice through the courts, Pascoli's son, the poet Giovanni, transformed the unsolved murder into the focal point of his literary career, effectively archiving his father's case. Pascoli was born on March 24, 1815 in Ravenna and became a man of considerable local prominence in the region of Romagna. He served as the administrator for La Torre, a vast agricultural estate owned by the Torlonia family of Rome. In the socio-economic hierarchy of 19th century Italy, this position represented extraordinary power. The administrator controlled hiring and firing decisions, managed rents, supervised workers, and wielded influence over the economic lifeblood of the entire region. Beyond his professional duties, Pascoli held civic positions as well, serving as municipal assessor and city councilman, representing the Republican political faction before aligning himself with the liberal monarchical movement. A crucial shift that was necessary to secure and retain his prestigious administrative role. By 1867, he had established himself as a man of rough but honest character, known for his integrity and unwavering loyalty to his employer. Despite the numerous family and professional obligations that consumed his time, he fathered 10 children with his wife, Caterina Allocatelli, a woman of minor nobility. The Pascoli household enjoyed considerable prosperity and stability. However, this very prominence would ultimately prove to be his undoing. The year 1867 was a volatile period throughout Italy. The nation had been unified only 6 years earlier in 1861, and the region of Romagna remained a hotbed of political tension. Competing factions engaged in ideological battles that often turned violent. Romagna was also plagued by regular robbery and other organized crime, with criminal organizations operating with relative impunity in the rural countryside. Yet the murder of Pascoli did not fit the typical pattern of common banditry or political assassination. Nothing of value was stolen from his person, and his body was left at the crime scene, transported home by his terrified horse. These details suggested that the assassination was not motivated by robbery or ideological conviction, but rather by a deliberate personal vendetta rooted in professional and economic rivalry. The Torlonia estate was far more than a source of agricultural income. It was the economic and political heart of the San Mauro region. Control of the estate meant control of employment, of land distribution, of wealth accumulation, and ultimately of the town itself. Historical analysis, supported by Giovanni's own investigations and later confirmed by modern scholars like Rosita Boschetti, suggests that Pascoli had become an obstacle. Perhaps he was too rigid in his enforcement of rules, or perhaps he stood in the way of local factions who sought to exploit the estate's resources for personal gain through smuggling, embezzlement, or other illicit schemes. The primary motive is believed to have been to remove an incorruptible administrator to make room for a more pliable replacement willing to tolerate graft and corruption. On the morning of August 10, 1867, Pascoli undertook what should have been a routine journey. He traveled to the market in the nearby city of Cassina, a trip he made regularly. While in the market, he purchased 2 dolls as gifts for his daughters. In the late afternoon, he began his return journey to San Mauro di Romagna, riding in his carriage drawn by his horse. While the road was familiar, it did pass through isolated stretches of countryside that were ideal for an ambush. As the carriage approached a location near Savignano, approximately 2 kilometers from the Pascoli family residence, assassins lying in concealment along the roadside opened fire. The gunfire came from multiple weapons, delivering a devastating volley that struck Pascoli with lethal force. He died almost instantly, with his body slumped in the carriage. Crucially, the assassins did not harm the horse. Spooked by the gunfire but physically uninjured, it continued along the familiar route toward home, driven by instinct. Eventually, the horse arrived at the Pascoli family residence with her grim cargo. Giovanni, only about 12 years old at the time, was at boarding school in Urbino when the news reached him, but the trauma of the event would mark him for life. His younger siblings, unaware of what had transpired, caught their first glimpse of their father when the horse arrived home with his body. Although the official investigation by the Royal Carabinieri and the Magistrate of Savignano was sluggish and ultimately inconclusive, the case being filed away as a crime committed by unknown culprits after 3 separate trials, caused the local community and the Pascoli family themselves to develop clear suspicions about who was responsible. Over the decades, through Giovanni's personal investigations, documented history, and modern archival research, a potential conspiracy has emerged with surprising clarity. The primary suspect identified by Giovanni and confirmed by subsequent historical research is a man named Pietro Cacciaguerra. Pietro was a local figure with considerable ambition and a clear motive. He had spent time in South America, where he accumulated wealth through unspecified means. Upon his return to the Savignano region, he had established himself as a signorotto, a petty lordling or local strongman of considerable ruthlessness and influence. More importantly, he harbored a deep desire to become the administrator of the Torlonia estate, a position he coveted and for which he competed directly with Pascoli. The evidence pointing to Pietro as the mind behind the crime is circumstantial but intriguing. Within 1 year of Pascoli's assassination, Pietro was indeed appointed as the new administrator of the Torlonia estate. He subsequently moved into La Torre, the very residence where the Pascoli family had lived, effectively inheriting not only Pascoli's position, but his status and property. The appointment was made with the explicit support of engineer Achille Petri, an envoy of Prince Alessandro Torlonia, who notably failed to appear at what was supposed to be Pascoli's final meeting to discuss the renewal of his contract, which happened to be the very day of the murder. Pietro was known to have significant associations with the criminal underworld of the region and was said to be capable of great violence and intimidation. He held political influence and appeared to operate with a level of protection that kept him safe from serious investigation or prosecution. The actual shooters are believed to have been 2 career criminals. Luigi Pagliarani and Michele Rocca were spotted in the vicinity of the crime scene in the days following the murder. Local rumor and scattered eyewitness testimony persistently identified these 2 men as the ones who fired on Pascoli's carriage. The magistrate's investigation focused on these 2 suspects, but both were ultimately acquitted, largely due to the collapse of witness testimony and the climate of fear that gripped the region. Some sources mention other possible accomplices, including Raffaele Della Motta and Michele Sacchini, both identified as agents of the Torlonia house, who were initially convicted of being paid assassins but were later exonerated. Della Motta was actually murdered 3 years later while attempting to mediate a feud between rival farming families. Pascoli family members actually suspect that this death was related to his knowledge of Pascoli's murder. Perhaps the most disturbing element of the case involves the behavior of Pascoli's employer, Prince Alessandro Torlonia. The prince's actions, or rather his inaction, suggest a far deeper complicity than mere negligence. According to historical accounts and Giovanni's own conclusions, the prince did not push forcefully for an investigation into the murder of his loyal employee. In fact, the opposite occurred. Almost immediately after Pascoli's death, the prince had the widow Caterina and her 10 children evicted from the Torre. He revoked the financial support the family received, plunging them into immediate economic hardship from which they would never fully recover. The rapid appointment of Pietro as the new administrator also suggests a level of coordination that points to something more than coincidence. Modern researcher Rosita Boschetti argues that the prince may have given his silent consent to the crime, or perhaps even approved of the change in management in advance. Perhaps Pietro promised the prince higher returns on the estate through more aggressive and more corrupt extraction of wealth from the colonists and tenant farmers. The prince may have viewed Pascoli as more of a liability over the years. Regardless, the prince's indifference to the investigation and his swift conclusion of Pascoli's presumed killer effectively terminated any possibility of a serious judicial reckoning. The failure of the legal system to bring anyone to justice for the murder was not attributable to a lack of evidence or suspicious circumstances, but rather to a catastrophic social and institutional collapse. Anyone who possessed information about the identity of the shooters or the existence of a plot was terrified of Pietro and his political connections. The crime had demonstrated that even a man of prominence and integrity could be killed with impunity in broad daylight. The implicit message was clear: speak and you could be next. The investigative records note that multiple witnesses existed, but that their testimony was either inconsistent, vague, or entirely absent. In some cases, women from the area had observed suspicious individuals near the murder scene, but they either refused to provide formal statements or retracted their testimony under pressure. The climate of fear was so pervasive that even family members of potential witnesses either remained silent or actively discouraged their relatives from cooperating with authorities. The initial investigation was superficial and marred by gross incompetence or deliberate obstruction. No serious ballistics analysis was conducted on the weapons allegedly carried by the suspect criminals. No thorough reconstruction of the crime scene was undertaken. Alibis that should have been scrutinized were accepted without rigorous checking. In multiple cases, evidence that might have been collected was lost or never properly inventoried. Local police, according to Giovanni's later assessment, were themselves part of the conspiracy of silence, either through coercion or complicity. Giovanni denied access to legal justice through the courts, and unable to compel the magistrates to pursue a serious investigation, made the decision to weaponize poetry. His verses became a public tribunal where the names of the guilty were invoked and accused, even if the law remained silent. Written in 1903, more than 3 decades after his father's death, La Cavala Storna is perhaps the most explicit accusation Giovanni ever wrote. The poem consists of 31 couplets of 11-syllable lines arranged in distic form. The poem stages an imagined scene in the stable of the Torre on a quiet night. Giovanni's mother, Caterina, stands before Pascoli's horse and speaks to her as if she were human, addressing the only creature who witnessed the murder and survived to tell about it. The mother's voice is filled with a combination of tenderness, anguish, and desperate hope. She recounts the nature of the horse, how it was born wild on a salted beach by the pines, with the spray of the sea still in its nostrils and the roar of the ocean still echoing in its ears. Yet despite its savage nature, the horse had learned to obey the gentle hand of Pascoli and later Giovanni's older brother, Giacomo, then a teenager. The mother recites a refrain that appears multiple times throughout the poem with only minor variations. In English, it reads, "Oh, the little mare, little dappled mare, who carried the one who will not return." The mother explains that Pascoli had spoken words before his death, final words that the horse presumably heard but could not repeat. She notes that the horse comprehends language and human emotion but lacks the capacity for speech. Then, in the poem's climactic moment, the mother makes a decision. She will speak a name aloud, the name of the man she believes ordered the murder. She lifts her finger and pronounces the name. At that exact moment, the horse emits a loud neigh. The neigh is presented as a confirmation of guilt delivered by nature itself when human institutions had failed to deliver justice. Caterina, Giovanni's mother, survived her husband's death by only a few months, dying in 1868 of a sudden heart attack. The loss of both parents before Giovanni had reached his teenage years left him and his siblings orphaned. Over the next 3 years, 2 of his sisters, Margherita, who died of typhoid fever in 1868, and Luigi, who died of meningitis in 1871, would follow their parents to the grave. Perhaps most disturbing to the Pascoli family, Giovanni's older brother Giacomo died in 1876, officially recorded as succumbing to typhoid fever. However, recent research suggests that Giacomo may have been poisoned. The suspicion rests on the fact that he served as a city assessor at the time of his death and reportedly possessed direct knowledge of the identities of those who participated in the conspiracy against his father. Two younger brothers, Raphael and Giuseppe Alessandro, became increasingly estranged from the surviving family nucleus as they struggled with economic hardship and emotional devastation. The youngest sister, Maria, and the sister Ida, until her marriage, remained closer to Giovanni. The young widow of Giacomo, seeking to claim a portion of the family's meager inheritance, engaged in legal disputes that further impoverished the family and scattered its members across different cities and regions. Between November 1998 and January 1999, the small working-class city of Pittsburg, California, became the epicenter of a terrifying murder spree that claimed 5 lives and left a community gripped by fear. Despite extensive investigations involving local police, the FBI, and significant resources, none of these murders have ever been solved. Pittsburg is located in eastern Contra Costa County in the San Francisco Bay Area. The city, with a population of approximately 54,000 at the time, was already grappling with elevated crime rates when the murders began. The Highway 4 corridor, which connects Pittsburg with neighboring communities of Bay Point and Antioch, became the central focus of the investigation, with most bodies discovered near this major thoroughfare in industrial or isolated areas. The first victim that we'll discuss was named Michael Ton. He was 27 years old and was discovered on November 9th, 1998, making him the first victim in this 2-month killing spree. A pedestrian found Michael's body at 7:50 a.m. in a drainage ditch alongside North Parkside Drive, approximately 100 yards west of Andrew Avenue. Michael was a resident of Concord, not Pittsburg, and according to friends and family, had no personal connections to the city where his body was found. He was a Philippines native who lived at the Willow Green Apartments on Willow Pass Road with his girlfriend for 4 years. The apartment manager, Tori Combs, described him as a nice person who worked odd jobs as a mechanic. The coroner determined that he had suffered severe head injuries from being bludgeoned and ultimately drowned face down in the shallow water at the bottom of the ditch. He was wearing jeans and a white t-shirt and appeared to have died approximately 6 hours before discovery. Investigators found that Michael's apartment had been ransacked, leading police to theorize he was likely killed during a home invasion robbery to eliminate a witness. His car remained at his Concord apartment complex, which struck those who knew him as highly unusual given his attachment to the vehicle. Michael was a regular patron at Malta's bar, where he played pool and enjoyed visiting card rooms in Pacheco. Police found no signs of a struggle near the ditch where his body was discovered, and his wallet was missing. However, investigators stated they had no definitive evidence indicating robbery as the motive. The second victim was 15-year-old Lisa Norrell. Lisa was the adopted daughter of an Italian-American woman named Minnie, who worked as a hairdresser in Walnut Creek. She and her then-husband, Jesse, who died in 1996, had adopted Lisa from a family in Mexico when she was 13 months old. Lisa was a sophomore at Pittsburg High School, described by teachers and friends as an energetic, caring, and outgoing young woman who had evolved from being shy in 6th grade. She had a close relationship with her biological brother, Tony Quesada, who was adopted by family friends living nearby, allowing the siblings to maintain their bond while growing up. The twins, Patricia and Lucretia Smith, Lisa's friends since 6th grade, remembered her as someone who would, quote, nag you to death if you were having a bad day until you told her what was wrong, always seeking to help others feel comfortable. On November 6th, 1998, Lisa attended a dance rehearsal at the ID's dancing hall in Antioch, as she had every evening that week. According to participants, Lisa angrily left the hall between 10:30 and 11 p.m. that night. The exact circumstances of her departure remain unclear, with some neighbors reporting she left after her dance partner refused to dance with her, while her mother believed Lisa got embarrassed because she couldn't learn the steps and became upset. Witnesses saw Lisa walking alone on the desolate, poorly lit Pittsburg-Antioch highway, presumably attempting to walk the 2+ miles home to East 12th Street in Pittsburg. She was wearing a long gray sweatshirt and blue jeans, carrying the dark blue velvet dress and black dress shoes she had brought to the party. It was a rainy, windy night with temperatures only in the high 40s. At 2:45 a.m., Minnie awoke and realized her daughter had not come home. She and family members spent hours searching in the rain. One of Lisa's black shoes was found on the side of the highway the morning after her disappearance. Her body was then discovered on November 14th, 8 days after she went missing, at the Navland landscaping site facing the highway between Pittsburgh and Antioch. She was found face down, her hands clenched in fists, tucked away under cardboard and rubble between parked cars and a building. The coroner's report indicated Lisa died of asphyxia, though heavily censored documents made it unclear whether she died from suffocation or strangulation. She had cuts and bruises on her chin and neck, with blood and body fluids found on her sweatshirt. None of the landscaping business workers had noticed the body during the week she was missing. Lisa's death devastated the community and sparked fears of a serial killer, particularly when additional women were murdered in the following weeks. Her teacher, Christine Rohde, noted that nearly a year after the murder, students were still living with the grief and felt unsafe because they didn't know what happened. The third victim was discovered on December 5th, and she was named Jessica Frederick. She was found stabbed to death in an auto wrecking yard at Harbor Street and Industry Road in Pittsburgh. Her body had been dumped alongside a road predominantly occupied by truck repair shops and salvage businesses, approximately 2 miles from where Lisa's body was discovered. The coroner determined Frederick died from multiple cut and stab wounds. According to court records, she had at times worked as a prostitute. She had previously lived in Sacramento and worked at both McDonald's and Home Depot. Frederick's case led to the only arrest and charges filed in connection with any of the Pittsburgh murders. In March 1999, her boyfriend Mohammed Niaz, age 51, was arrested as a suspect. He was a cab driver who had dated Frederick on and off for years. The investigation of Mohammed began after police received tips from Frederick's ex-boyfriend and her mother, Caroline Anderson. In December 1998, he had voluntarily provided police with samples of his blood and hair. When officers went to Mohammed's Concord apartment, they found a patio sliding glass door open, but Mohammed was not home. Police left to search for him at the Concord BART station, where he often picked up cab fares, then returned to the apartment and entered through an unlocked front door without a search warrant. Inside, they found a bent knife and blood in the sink. DNA profiling established that the blood belonged to Frederick, but the case took a dramatic turn in February 2000 when court judge Laurel Lindenbaum ruled that Pittsburgh police had entered Mohammed's apartment illegally without a warrant, calling the police visit clearly investigatory rather than a welfare check, as prosecutors claimed. The murder case was thus thrown out. However, the appellate court later overturned Judge Lindenbaum's ruling, and Mohammed was arrested again and returned to jail approximately a month later in 2001. Further forensic expertise conducted in 2001 excluded him as the potential killer of either Frederick or the other victims in the series. He was never convicted, and Frederick's murder remains officially unsolved despite the initial charges. The next victim was named Rachel Cruz, and she was last seen alive on December 13th. Her body was found 2 days later on December 15th in a ditch off California Avenue, approximately half a mile from where Lisa's body had been discovered. She had been strangled to death, with the coroner's report indicating she died of asphyxia and manual strangulation. The coroner's report also suggested that Cruz's body had been dragged along the road for a short distance. Like Lisa, her belongings were discovered near her body. Cruz was a mother of 2 children and struggled with substance addiction. She spent considerable time in the company of individuals involved in prostitution, though sources vary on whether she herself engaged in the same type of work. On the same day Cruz's body was found, another woman, Tammy Davis, was discovered severely beaten in a portable toilet at a construction site in nearby Bay Point. Davis, age 38, survived the attack but sustained catastrophic injuries. Detective Michael Costa of the Contra Costa County Sheriff's Office stated that Davis would, quote, never be at full capacity again. Forum discussions indicate that Davis's throat had been slashed in addition to the beating, a detail often omitted from official reports. Davis was able to provide investigators with a limited description of her assailant, whom she described as a Hispanic male driving a dark Chevrolet Monte Carlo. This description would become significant when compared to witness accounts from the final murder. Then on January 8, 1999, the fifth victim's body was found in a ditch in the wastelands of Pittsburgh along Willow Pass Road, west of Builders Circle. Her name was Valerie Schultz, and she was also engaged in work. Investigation revealed that Schultz had lived in Bay Point from 1991 to 1994 and had been arrested for during that time. In 1994, she relocated to Waubun, Minnesota, but had returned to the Pittsburgh area just 1 week before her death, staying at a local motel. The coroner determined she died from multiple stab wounds, though evidence also indicated she had been strangled. During witness interviews, authorities located someone who claimed to have seen Schultz enter a four-door car with faded brown paint. The vehicle's distinctive feature was a noisy muffler. According to this witness, the driver was a dark-skinned man of either Hispanic or Samoan descent, aged 30 to 40, who weighed more than 220 pounds and had thick, wavy hair. This description bore similarities to the description provided by Tammy Davis, the surviving victim. Schultz's murder marked the end of the documented killing spree, though whether the killer stopped, left the area, or was incarcerated for other reasons remains unknown. One controversial aspect of the investigation was the widespread sealing of documents and evidence. Within days of Lisa's body being found in November 1998, police requested that documents related to the case be sealed. After suspects Walton and Henneby were arrested and released in January 1999, Pittsburgh police sealed the arrest and search warrants served on the two men. Inspector Conity said the following: "The reasons that we would seal documents are that we believe the material to be integral to the case being solved, and that the release of that information would greatly hinder our investigation. This sealing of records sparked a court fight over media access to public records. In March 1999, under pressure from the San Francisco Chronicle and Contra Costa Times, some coroner's reports were released, though they were heavily censored. From the outset, investigators and the community debated whether a serial killer was responsible for the murders or if the cases were unrelated. Detective Costa of the sheriff's office stated he did not believe the cases were related, arguing, 'The fact that Davis was left alive makes me believe that these women were not attacked by the same person. There is no relationship between the cases.' However, many disagree. The similarities were striking, as 4 of the 5 victims were women and 3 were known or suspected prostitutes. Additionally, most bodies were found within miles of each other in industrial areas, and the timeline was compressed into just 2 months. The geographical clustering along the Highway 4 corridor and the similar disposal methods suggested possible connections. Criminologist Mike Rustigan from San Francisco State cautioned against premature conclusions, noting that serial killers can spread victims over months and years. He said, 5 weeks is nothing in the annals of serial killers. They can spread their victims over months and years. Law enforcement and prosecutors should not let their guard down. Police also examined potential connections to earlier unsolved murders in the area, including the 1992 deaths of Sharon Mados and Andrea Ingersoll. Andrea's body was found on November 12, 1992 in West Pittsburgh, now Bay Point, after an anonymous caller, who some sources claim identified himself as the Zodiac Killer, phoned police with the location. Sharon was found on July 18, 1992 in Pittsburgh, dying of a traumatic injury. An even earlier murder, that of Teresa Colleen Brown in April 1988, involved a woman stabbed to death after apparently being run off Highway 4 into a ravine. The most significant development in the Lisa Norrell investigation came in early January 1999. On December 7, 1998, 3 tips alerted police to 2 Antioch men with criminal histories: David Michael Henneby, 24, and Gary Lee Walton, 39. After surveillance, police arrested both men on January 6, 1999, on suspicion of murdering Lisa. The arrests involved 61 officers who searched 5 homes and 5 vehicles, impounding 2 cars. They also searched the Antioch home of David's sister, Michelle, though she was not described as a suspect. Court records revealed disturbing details about David's background. In November 1998, the same month Lisa disappeared, David was arrested for making terrorist threats and abusing his wife, Carla. According to a police report, he pulled a gun on her in a drugstore parking lot, saying, "You think when I stabbed you in the neck was bad. You just wait." 2 days later, he beat her head against the wall at his grandparents' Antioch home and threw her to the ground. David had pleaded guilty to drunk driving in 1997 and had been arrested on assault and drug charges with numerous failure to appear violations. Walton was convicted in September 1993 of manufacturing illegal substances and receiving stolen property. Police had discovered drug-making paraphernalia at his Antioch mechanic shop, and he served a 1-year jail term. Walton lived in a rundown unit on West 9th Street with 3 daughters. Neighbors Barbara and Estuardo Sobalvaro complained about suspicious activity at his residence for years, with people coming at all hours. At a press conference immediately after the arrests, police shared their theory. The suspects, with David driving Walton's car, allegedly picked up Lisa near where one of her shoes was found after she stormed out of the dance hall. Police believe the 2 men held Lisa in the car for several hours before killing her. However, the case collapsed almost immediately. Barely 24 hours after the arrests, on January 7, 1999, District Attorney Gary Yancey announced there was insufficient evidence to file charges, and both men were released. Prosecutors obtained evidence convincing them that Walton had no connection to the slaying. Walton was then released from jail on January 7th. David remained in county jail in Martinez on unrelated domestic violence and assault charges he had been held on since December 4th, 1998, charges for which he would eventually serve a 6-year sentence. Despite the lack of charges, he continued to be considered a strong suspect, though police refused to comment on this. The connection between David and Walton was never clearly established, nor were the reasons that motivated police to arrest them ever fully explained to the public. Another controversial element of the investigation involved Dwayne D. Shoemake, a former Antioch fire captain. In September 1998, Shoemake had been charged with 5 counts of molesting 2 young girls. However, on January 11, 1999, just days after David and Walton were released, the charges against Shoemake were dropped, even though a judge had declared there was ample evidence to put him on trial. The charges were reportedly dropped in exchange for Shoemake providing evidence to police about suspect David, who was married to Shoemake's niece at the time. District Attorney Brian Haynes and Pittsburgh police refused to disclose what information, if any, that he provided. The mothers of the 2 girls Shoemake allegedly initially accepted the dropping of criminal charges, hoping it would lead to an arrest and conviction in the Lisa murder. However, after 7 months had passed with no progress in the case, the mothers decided to bring civil charges against Shoemake, which were scheduled to be heard in Contra Costa County Superior Court in Martinez. This controversial deal became a source of community frustration and highlighted the desperation investigators felt to solve Lisa's murder. One final development I'd like to mention occurred in 2009. A man named Philip Garrido was arrested along with his wife Nancy for the 1991 kidnapping of 11-year-old J.C. Dugard. Philip had held Dugard captive in buildings in his backyard for 18 years, during which she was repeatedly abused and gave birth to 2 children. Authorities discovered that Philip, who lived in Antioch, had a history of kidnapping and assaulting girls in the area and had either been acquitted or paroled for these crimes. Significantly, from 1998 to 1999, the period of the murders, he worked near the locations where the female victims' bodies were found. This connection prompted police to conduct a 4-day search of his home, looking for evidence linking him to the Pittsburgh murders. However, no evidence connecting him to the killings was discovered, and he was ruled out as a suspect. On the morning of March 8, 1921, in Waukesha, Wisconsin, John Burlick, an employee of the O'Laughlin Stone Company, made a horrifying discovery while near the quarry pond. Floating in the water was the body of a small boy, dressed in what appeared to be expensive clothing. John immediately rushed back to the Stone Company's office and contacted Waukesha County Sheriff Clarence Keebler, who in turn contacted County Coroner L.F. Lee. The 2 officials drove out to the pond to retrieve the remains. The child appeared to be between 5 and 7 years old, standing approximately 3 feet 6 inches tall. He had shaggy blonde hair, brown eyes, and was missing a tooth from his lower jaw. jaw, though it remains unclear whether this tooth had been knocked out during the attack or had simply fallen out naturally. The boy showed no signs of malnourishment and bore no visible marks of physical abuse aside from the fatal wound. What immediately captured the attention of investigators was the boy's clothing. He was dressed in garments that suggested a wealthy background. His outfit consisted of a dark gray sweater manufactured by the Bradley Knitting Company, an expensive brand, along with Munsing brand underwear, size 6. He also wore a light-colored blouse, black lightweight stockings, and patent leather shoes with cloth tops. Notably, no overcoat was found, which was unusual for the season. The quality of these garments was exceptional for the era. The Bradley Knitting Company was known for producing high-end sweaters, while Munsing was manufactured by a prominent Minnesota-based company that produced quality undergarments for children and adults. These were not the clothes of a poor or neglected child, which deepened the mystery of why no one came forward to claim him. County officers collaborated with the Milwaukee Police Department to conduct a comprehensive search for clues to the boy's identity. For lack of proper identification, authorities documented his physical characteristics. Newspaper reporters reading through the police files dubbed the mysterious victim Little Lord Fauntleroy. The nickname referenced the title character from Francis Hodgson Burnett's hugely popular 1886 children's novel that shared the same name. The book told a rags-to-riches story about a well-dressed young boy from modest American circumstances who discovers he is heir to an English earldom. The novel had been adapted into numerous stage plays and films by 1921, and the character's formal velvet suits had even inspired a fashion trend for young boys in the early 20th century. Detectives faced immediate challenges in establishing a timeline for the murder. Their estimates for how long the body had been in the quarry pond ranged wildly from as little as a few days to as long as 6 months. The cold Wisconsin weather and water temperature could have significantly slowed decomposition, making precise dating nearly impossible with the forensic technology available at the time. The initial theory proposed by investigators was that the child had accidentally drowned, perhaps wandering away from adult supervision and falling into the quarry pond. However, Coroner L.F. Lee's autopsy quickly dismissed this possibility. The examination revealed a deep laceration on the boy's head, consistent with being struck by a blunt instrument. Furthermore, the coroner found an unusually small amount of water in the child's lungs, a critical detail that indicated the boy was already dead when his body entered the water. The cause of death was determined to be homicide, specifically blunt force trauma to the head. The child had been murdered elsewhere, then disposed of in the quarry pond in what investigators believed was an attempt to conceal the crime and delay identification. In a practice common for the era, but which would seem disrespectful by modern standards, authorities decided to display the boy's body publicly at a local funeral home, inviting residents to view the remains in hopes that someone would recognize the child. Hundreds of people filed past the cold slab in the morgue, staring at the lifeless face of the young victim. Despite this extensive public viewing, not a single person could identify him. The boy's photograph appeared in newspapers throughout the Midwest, generating widespread publicity for the case. Various officials formed a small committee and offered an initial reward of $250 for information leading to the boy's identification and the arrest of his killer. When this failed to generate useful leads, the reward was increased to $1,000, a substantial sum equivalent to approximately $12,000 in today's currency. Despite the significant financial incentive, the reward was never claimed and no valuable information surfaced. The most significant lead in the case came from Mike Coker, a pump man employed at the O'Laughlin Stone Company. Mike informed police that approximately 5 weeks before the body was discovered, around early February 1921, he had witnessed a suspicious encounter at the quarry. According to his account, a young woman wearing a distinctive red sweater had been wandering around the property on February 6th. When Mike questioned her about what she was doing, she tearfully asked him if he had seen a young boy in the neighborhood. Mike noted that the woman appeared visibly distraught and was crying. The woman was accompanied by a male companion who Mike observed was less interested in the conversation and instead appeared focused on the pond itself, specifically watching the area where the child's body would later be found. After this brief exchange, the couple walked around the quarry for several minutes before leaving together in their car. The couple was never located by police despite extensive efforts to find them. Their identity and their connection to the murdered child remain unknown to this day. Some speculate that these were the boy's parents, while others suggest that they were his killers, returning to view the disposal of the remains. Shortly after the boy's burial, police received a disturbing tip. The woman in the red sweater seen by Mike had allegedly committed suicide in the same pond where the boy's body had been found. If true, this development could have potentially solved the case or at least provided crucial information about the boy's identity. Authorities immediately launched a search operation. Police dragged the pond extensively and even resorted to setting off dynamite in the water, hoping the explosions would bring a submerged corpse to the surface. Despite their aggressive search efforts, no additional body was ever recovered from the quarry pond. The report of the woman's death turned out to be yet another false lead in a case that was growing colder with each passing day. Another potential break in the case came from a man named David Dobrik, owner of the Liberty Department store in Waukesha. Dobrik contacted police and stated with certainty that the clothing the boy was wearing had been sold in his store during a sale in January 1921, less than 2 months before the body was discovered. While this information confirmed the clothing was purchased locally, it provided little practical value. In 1921, stores did not maintain detailed customer records, and there was no way to determine who had actually purchased the specific articles of clothing. A seemingly more promising lead emerged when a Chicago man named J.B. Belson contacted authorities insisting that the dead boy was his nephew, the son of his sister, Mrs. Hormage. Belson provided a compelling backstory, stating that his sister's ex-husband had kidnapped their 2 children and had threatened to kill them on numerous occasions. This scenario fits the evidence of a child from an affluent family murdered and dumped where he might not be identified. However, when police investigated Belson's claims, they quickly verified that the Hormage children were alive and well. For years following the burial, local townspeople reported sightings of a mysterious woman who would occasionally visit little Lord Fauntleroy's grave. This woman always wore a heavy veil that obscured her face, making identification impossible. Witnesses observed her placing flowers on the boy's grave and sometimes sitting beside his headstone for extended periods. Speculation ran rampant about this individual's identity and her connection to the case. Some theorized she knew the actual identity of the boy but was unable or unwilling to come forward publicly, perhaps due to fear, shame, or involvement in the crime. She eventually stopped appearing at the cemetery, and her identity remains as much a mystery as the boy whose grave she visited. Another interesting avenue in the case developed about 28 years later. In 1949, a medical examiner from Milwaukee named E.L. Theringer suggested that the unidentified boy might actually be Homer Henry LeMay, a child who had disappeared around the same time under highly suspicious circumstances. Homer was approximately 6 years old when he vanished in 1921. His mother, Hazel, had died in 1919 from tuberculosis after receiving treatment for the disease in Janesville, Wisconsin in the fall of 1920. This left Homer in the care of his father, Edmund. When questioned about his son's whereabouts, Edmund provided investigators with a doubtful story. He claimed that in 1921, Homer had been left with a Chicago couple named Norton, who were family friends. He elaborated and stated that the couple more or less adopted Homer. According to Edmund's account, the Nortons then took Homer to Argentina in South America. He stated that he learned of his son's death only after receiving a newspaper clipping from South America that detailed Homer's death in an automobile accident in Argentina. Police took this story seriously enough to conduct a thorough investigation. Detectives followed the lead all the way to Argentina, searching for any evidence that would validate Edmund's claims. Their investigation was exhaustive, but they found absolutely no proof to support any element of Edmund's story. There was no record of any automobile accident involving a child matching Homer's description, no South American newspaper that had published such an article, no evidence that a couple named Norton had ever adopted Homer, no adoption records for Homer through any agency, and no immigration records showing Homer or the Norton family traveling to Argentina. Despite the complete absence of supporting evidence and despite the inherently suspicious nature of Edmund's story, he was never charged with any crime related to Homer's disappearance. What makes Edmund an even more compelling suspect is his broader pattern of suspicious behavior and alleged violence against women. According to information referenced in multiple sources, Edmund had a deeply troubling history. He was accused of falsifying his wife Hazel's signature while she was missing, though he was later found not guilty of this charge. He remarried after Hazel's death to a woman named Ruby, and there are allegations that he attempted to murder her. Edmund married a third time to a woman named Cecilia. On June 15, 1948, Cecilia disappeared under suspicious circumstances, and her body was never found. When she went missing in 1948, police reportedly searched the same quarry where little Lord Fauntleroy's body had been found 27 years earlier. During renovations to one of Edmund's homes, a woman's skull was discovered. Testing confirmed it was not Hazel's skull, raising the horrifying possibility that Edmund may have murdered yet another unidentified woman. This pattern of suspected violence against women, combined with the suspicious disappearance of his son and the completely fabricated story about the Nortons and Argentina, makes Edmund the prime suspect in the Fauntleroy case. The theory advanced by many researchers is that Edmund murdered his son Homer, likely with the assistance or knowledge of his second wife, and disposed of the body in the O'Laughlin quarry. The woman in the red sweater seen crying at the quarry could have been the second wife experiencing remorse, or possibly even a relative of Homer's searching for the missing child. When pathologist E.L. Theringer proposed the Homer theory in 1949, he held a press conference on May 16th, strongly advocating for the exhumation of little Lord Fauntleroy's remains. Theringer believed that even with the forensic limitations of the late 1940s, an examination of the bones might yield valuable information that could confirm or rule out the Homer LeMay identification. However, Theringer deferred the final decision to Sheriff Leslie Rockteacher and Coroner Alvin Johnson of Waukesha County. After consideration, both officials decided against exhuming the body. Their stated reasoning was that the forensic technology available in 1949 would not be able to definitively prove the boy's identity, and therefore disturbing his grave was not justified. This decision has struck many people as highly suspicious. Some have speculated that local officials may have been protecting Edmund, who may have had connections or influence in the community. Others have suggested that there may have been reluctance to reopen a case that had generated negative publicity for Waukesha decades earlier. Still, others accept the official explanation that the technology of 1949 genuinely could not have provided useful answers. Regardless of the motivation, the 1949 decision meant that Fauntleroy would remain in his grave with his identity still unknown.